Back on the Jefferson Exchange on the News and Information Service of JPR, I'm Jeffrey Riley. The balance of the hour goes over to Underground History, our joint project with the Southern Oregon University Laboratory of Anthropology. This time the topic is horror movies, but with a twist. Here's SULA's Chelsea Rose.
You're listening to Underground History, a collaboration between Jefferson Public Radio and the Southern Oregon University Laboratory of Anthropology, or SULA. I'm your host, Chelsea Rose, and each episode we take a deep dive into little-known aspects of history in Oregon and beyond. Today's topic is pretty far afield from archaeology and our usual subjects, but it combines so many things that I love that I couldn't resist. We've got film, slumber parties, feminism, social commentary, and horror. So grab a drink and some popcorn and sit back because we are going to the movies. My guests today are the scary smart Joe Isaacson, author of Stepford Daughters, Weapons for Feminists in Contemporary Horror, and screenwriter Suzanne Kiley, who wrote, among many other things, the 2021 remake of Slumber Party Massacre. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so excited we get to all be here to have this conversation. And I want to start by contextualizing the way that art and storytelling has always been one of the ways that we process our angst, fears, and uncomfortability about the unknown. I remember when I took a folklore class in college, we talked about how fairies and fairy tales were replaced by aliens and science fiction in the 20th century as a way for society to process their fears of emerging technologies. And it made me really realize this relationship is recursive. We're constantly creating and responding to these things over time. So, Joe, in your book, you wrote that in horror, we're given permission to explore forbidden violence. And I think that this is really an extension of the well-established outlets for our anxiety. So do you want to start by speaking a little bit to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so I think that in sort of realist movies that aren't genre, that aren't horror, often we're very scared to talk about violence, or we have a kind of given script about how to talk about violence that often is very individualized. We think about it as, maybe somebody who did a crime and made a bad choice or who's inherently evil. But horror's sort of atmosphericness, its relationship to sort of the repressed, allows us to kind of rethink, I think, our relationship to violence. I'm really influenced by a theorist, Robin Wood, who talks about how horror is sort of where we can talk about everything that's repressed and oppressed, and that the sort of things that are taboo to think about kind of come back to us in the form of monsters. And one of the ways that we can think about that is, just the more general structural violence that things like misogyny or classism or, sort of various forms of power relationships create in our everyday lives that are hard to represent through a single person, but can be represented through these sort of monsters that telegraph these fears in different ways. So it's, to me, just the place that we get the real realism, where of the things that we just can't say in representations that seem real. So it's kind of paradoxical that way.
Most people think about horror as make-believe, but like you said, there's really a lot of ways in which this genre exaggerates the actual horrors of modern society. And Jordan Peele has really leaned into that type of storytelling more recently. But these tropes can also, really add tension because a lot of people can relate to these things in our lives. There's so much baggage that comes with them. Susie, do you want to talk a little bit about how you think about that as a screenwriter, like how you kind of create characters that reflect these larger, structural racism or capitalism or, the cult of domesticity, and how you kind of encapsulate that in actors on a, in a screenplay that can, reference that?
Yeah, I think comedy does that also very well. And I remember, I think it's in Preston Sturges's Sullivan's Travels, that they say that you can get any message across if people are laughing. And I actually think the same holds true with horror, because you're not, giving someone a message in their face. You're wrapping it in this story in a different kind of horror. And I think that makes it more palatable for people. And that's sort of how the way I think about it. And I'm always approaching the things that I write from my own, as outlandish as they are, they're always sort of based on my own experiences. And, in particular with Slumber Party, it's, in fact, or my other movies, you'll sort of notice this theme of daughters dealing with either the death or a tragedy or trauma that their mom had, and how they're dealing with that in their own way and in the context of horror movies.
Yeah, so like a generational relationship to like violence and tragedy. I want to follow that up too with the idea of comedy, because there really is a lot of like comedy wrapped up in a lot of horror, and it seems like such a paradoxical like partnership. But for example, and spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Slumber Party Massacre, stop now, go watch the movie and then tune back in. But there's a lot of symbolism at play, with, the biggest one obviously is the drill, which is this super phallic, weapon that this man that chases these women has. And at the end of the movie, it's slashed in half, which of course we can break down. But there's also the really funny scene where the can of clams is like slammed onto the drill and thereby rendering it useless as a weapon. And, it's funny. It's like interesting. But, how did horror and comedy kind of become, how did they where did that start? Like that kind of like funniness in these scenes that, are really violent and you wouldn't otherwise expect the humor.
Joe, do you want to tackle
Well, it
this?
sounds like Chelsea's asking about Slumber Party Massacre, but I have to say I just found it so funny, and I thought you just did a fabulous job with both, adhering to the original intent to make it a kind of parody that kind of got muted, it sounds like, from Rita Mae Brown's original script, but also just of like the tropes of slashers from that period. I just admire so much. I especially love the way that you turned around the male gaze and have like the boys be these like sort of ogled by the camera in these ways that is just, I've watched it a couple of times and I just laugh out loud hysterically every time. It's so good. And I think obviously you brought up Jordan Peele is like the kind of place where you see this merger of those two genres, which I think are both, places where emotions kind of escape, things get past the censor of like things that you're afraid to talk about in both comedy and horror. And he does that too, where he always has like a kind of thread of hilarity going through these very serious topics that allows you to kind of have catharsis in more than one way in the film.
Yeah, it allows you to kind of sit through it and survive it, I guess. Yeah. You're listening to Underground History on the Jefferson Exchange. You can find us online at jeffexchange.org. I'm your host, Chelsea Rose, and today I'm speaking with Joe Isaacson and Suzanne Kiley about the way in which the horror genre can reflect or critique modern society. And Joe, I want to get back to your idea about, kind of flipping the gaze, because one of my favorite scenes in the Susie's Slumber Party Massacre is the pillow fight.
Okay.
It's like the best, because, you think that the women are having a pillow fight, but really that kind of signals that they're mobilizing and ready to protect and defend themselves. They're prepared for once, which is not common, in slumber or in horror movies. And instead, the guys are like, can I rip this pillow in half? It starts with like kind of this like macho posturing, and it goes into like this total pillow fight. So do you want to speak a little bit about how, that must have been really fun to write, to act. Obviously you had fun with the script. So you want to talk a little bit to that process?
Yeah. And shout out to Deniska Esterhazy who directed it. And it was really, I put it on the page, and then she really took it a step further and really saw the vision. So, it was her, she really accentuated the gaze and did such an amazing job. But yeah, I just for me, that was one of the first things when I was asked to write it, the project, and just thinking about how I was such a fan of the original movie and how I wanted to sort of, how I would make it my own. And of course, I thought about how, in the original where you see the women in the shower, and I had read something that Amy Holden Jones was, when she was going through scripts and to direct, and Roger Corman said, and she found Slumber Party Massacre, and Roger Corman said, yeah, sure, you can do it, but I just have to see boobs. There must be boobs in it. And so, people will talk about, why did she choose this male gaze? And I was thinking, well, I'm not sure she didn't really have a choice. And so, that was one of the first things I really wanted to write is changing that and putting them in, front and center for that kind of pillow fight. And just it always makes me laugh when thinking about college dudes when they get super excited about stuff and they rip their shirts off and excitement. And it sort of just came from there. And then, in Slumber Party Massacre 2, the girls do have kind of a ridiculous pillow fight like that. And, with the feathers flying. And so I was sort of, morphed into an homage from that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and the original film, which I think came out in '82, right? It's really within kind of that second wave feminism. So we see women as phone repair people, and they're on a sports team, and their lives and the dialogue isn't just around boys. And that's a big shift from a lot of what you'd seen on TV. But again, men are invading their space. There's nudity. There's all these other things. So you mentioned a little bit before, Joe, about how, the original intent of having this be kind of a parody and a really feminist, it kind of was interrupted by Hollywood. And I remember listening to a podcast about Halloween and how that also kind of, opened the door for kind of the exploitation of women to become these, the victims in these films. But that wasn't the intent of that movie either. I don't know who has something to say to that. So either one of you or both of you jump in. That's kind of a big topic.
Yeah, I think that it was interesting because I went back to, I remember I was so excited to see Slumber Party Massacre the first time because I knew it was written by Rita Mae Brown, and she's, one of the most sort of well-known feminist lesbians from second wave feminism. I already knew she was funny, and then when I saw it, I was disappointed because especially right off the bat is a shower scene, and there's just boobs right away. And then when I went back to see it, I just saw that they kind of just got that over with quickly, that part. And then there's a lot of, like you say, sort of feminist moves in this too. It passes the Bechdel test better than almost any movie of the time, probably, So I think that they were reacting, to kind of the pressure on the slasher movie to be about sort of exploiting the sort of female body and a sort of sadistic gaze on the female body. But I think, Carol Clover is probably the closest feminist theorist to thinking about Slumber Party Massacre. And she, from the beginning, saw this sort of final girl who, even in Halloween, makes it through the whole thing as a sort of signifier of the idea that the male viewer wasn't just enjoying watching this woman be torn apart, but was actually identifying with what she calls the victim hero, and was identifying with the peril that she's in. And so even when these slashers seem really exploitative, they're also, I think, exploring all of our vulnerability to violence in a way that is more ambiguous than sometimes the way people talk about it.
So we've got to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Underground History. And we're back. You're listening to Underground History. I'm Chelsea Rose, and today we're talking slumber parties. So I can't wait to get back into this conversation. And, I want to follow up, and maybe, Susie, you can answer this one too, about the final girl trope. So, we have the Friday the 13th final girl, Adrienne King, I believe, lives in my neck of the woods. But the actress that did that. But, this, like you said, it's kind of a fraught trope, because in some ways they're really empowered and formidable, but they're often stuck within this patriarchal framework. They have to be like the virginal kind of nerdy counterpart to the sexy bimbo that gets killed right away. So there's some, more nuanced examples of that, of course, and it's kind of evolving over time. But, one of the things that's so cool about the Slumber Party franchise is it's the idea of final girls. So it's women working together. Mm-hmm. It's not just one woman. So, you want to talk a little bit about that, Susie, about being able to have more than one heroine, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that was always, I think, important to me. I mean, partly because, when you write characters, you love them and you don't want to see any of them die. So
I never thought about that.
I get attached to them. But also it felt, particularly with Slumber Party, I think that, and particularly with women, I think it's really important to show, people or women working together, and that, as a team, that they're trying to solve this problem, and that they can save each other, and not just they're smarter than just being picked off one by one. And, had they not had this extra issue, they would have all survived. But, alas, they were very smart. They just was, something they didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing that you do that's so funny and so smart is just have them all know the rules of the final girl and the way people get picked off. And so they play on it. And like when you rewatch your film, you can see like through the whole thing, your expectations are like that they're regular victims in this, conventional slasher plot. And then you realize they were acting out those parts the whole time very intentionally to like attract their prey. And they're the like aggressors. And the funniest part, I love it when the hot girl who's supposed to get killed off first because she's sexual just takes out her boobs because she's like she's playing that role,
Yeah,
it's really like just have so much fun with those tropes.
Yeah, the tropes themselves are weaponized against the killer. That's really fun too. Joe, you mentioned is it Bechdel test? How do you pronounce that? Bechdel test?
Bechtel? I don't know. I think that's how it is. Yeah.
Okay. It's another one of those words I've never said out loud before. But for those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically there's three components. There has to be one or more named female. The women have to talk to each other, and they have to talk to each other about something other than boys. And it's such a low bar, yet so many movies don't even come close, which is like so shocking. But one of the genres that does do better than most is slasher films. And I think that's really interesting, and it kind of builds on some of the things we're talking about. Joe, do you want to speak a little bit to why you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Slumber Party Massacre, I mean, it's not, one thing is it's often about just survival, which is actually kind of what women have to do in these movies. But in the original, it's really interesting that they have them be really like absorbed in sports, and they call their coach and talk about, sports. So they have these other sort of topics. But I do think, that there's all these actors and all these roles that were so important for women. I mean, you see the people like Barbara Crampton, and now, Mia Goth and Toni Collette. And actually the meatiest roles for women, I think, have often been in horror films, but they're somehow not paid attention to when people are talking about, like, great actors. Like, you never see an actor get an Oscar or, almost any award, right, for being in a horror film. So that it's a denigrated genre, but I think because of that, it kind of gets around some sort of male prestige things that give all the juicy parts to men and allows for like the development of women's parts in more substantial ways, which is always really exciting to see. Like I wrote a piece on women's acting in horror films, and so I was doing research trying to find other things written on that, and I really could not find almost any. It was kind of mind blowing that people don't give agency to the kind of acting and kind of substantive relationships between women in a horror film. So I'd love to see more of that.
Susie,
Toni
go ahead.
Collette
Yeah.
and sorry, Chelsea, I was going to say Toni Collette in Hereditary should have not only been nominated for an Oscar, but won the Oscar for that role.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, Susie, when you're writing these scripts, I mean, how does that kind of play into that? Do you feel like you have a little more freedom in this kind of a script than a drama or something like that? Or do you think more about, how can I make a really meaty role for someone that maybe wouldn't otherwise get it?
I honestly, no. I just, when I'm writing it, like I said, I write from, loosely, my own experiences or things that I think are funny or cool or interesting or, that I want to see. And I'm just, pleased that people want to say the words and do them. So it's really, it's just like I said, when you're coming from an honest place, even if you have a ridiculous guy carrying a power drill that's chasing women, if you're really still coming from an honest place, I think that's where the worker or the actors can have fun and do what they do, because it's not. It can be campy, it can silly, it can be ridiculous, but it's all based in truth.
Yeah, for sure.
It was so interesting hearing you say that it was about your mom or about a parent's role in your own trauma or their trauma's role in your own life, because that just works so well. And then it was so cool how that allowed you to be kind of talking back to earlier periods of horror and that genre and relate it to contemporary, genre by this sort of intergenerational trauma. So it just works on all these levels.
Thank you. And, I think about that a lot when because I love horror movies. I love watching them. And I always often when a movie ends, I go like, how are people affected? What is their future going to be like? So I do sort of, a lot of times I'll come up with ideas that be like, 10, 15, 20 years after this certain event, like how are people still coping with that? And I think about that a lot when I write. So
I love that.
Because nothing ends when the movie ends in real life. You still have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I think with Dana in the Slumber Party that I wrote, she sees her mother. If she can fix her mother, then she can make sure that she doesn't sort of have the same life as her mother did. So, and I think, we can all kind of relate to that as we want to do it better, different, but whatever better is. And so I think that was, her journey in the movie is too. She can eradicate her mother's greatest fear, then they can all move on and have better lives.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You're listening to Underground History on the Jefferson Exchange. You can find us online at jeffexchange.org. I'm your host, Chelsea Rose, and today we're telling scary stories and the ways in which they can reflect and critique modern society. So I want to follow up on that. I was reading a little bit more about some of the different movies that have come out that have kind of had a feminist, something to say about it. And one of them was, the name is it something about Walking Home in the Dark? It's about a vampire, a woman that's a vampire. Do you guys know that one?
A Girl Walks Home.
A Girl Walks Home. Yeah. And like the part of it that's like so telling is like she can walk anywhere she wants and not have to deal with so much of the other things that women have to think about when you walk alone at night. And it's just like at a basic level, that's something that if you're not a woman, you just don't understand that, So, some of the tropes and things to play with are like so, it's just so basic, like, wanting to feel safe, doing like basic things. So I don't know if either one of you want to speak a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, basically, that movie is so great because she, it's by this, young woman who's, I love that movie, so I could go on about it. But,
Yeah.
but she's a vampire, and so, and that is a really interesting, I think, newer thing that the new Slumber Party plays with too. Is she's not the victim; she's the monster, and it becomes this kind of fantasy of what if we got to be the ones that other people were afraid of when they walked down the street at night. And that is sort of what it seems like in Susie's like piece of, just having these characters who are playing victims, but they're heavily armed. And like you were saying, their pillow fight is actually a place to store their weapons, right? So imagining this reversal where the hunted becomes the hunter. Now that we have more women making these films, getting to direct them and write, I mean, the original Slumber Party Massacre is so rare because to be written by a woman and directed by a woman. And now that there's more voices like that, I think there's more tendency to have that plot of, the empowerment of being the monster as a kind of fantasy, to a feminist fantasy, which is always really, fun to watch for sure.
But the monster, but not the crazed, insane, hysterical woman or whatever. Like, because sometimes the women in older movies are the monster, but they're not sympathetic or empowered in the same way, I guess.
I want to also add too, Chelsea, is that, when you asked about Final Girls earlier, I think that's, what we all love about the Final Girl too, is because we can envision ourselves as we're facing the if we're not the monster, we're facing the monster and able to outwit and kill them. And that feels very empowering too, that we want hope that we'll be the final girl should that situation happen. Or just in general, we want to feel like the powerful ones. And so we can put, ourselves in their shoes.
Yeah, we're the ones that don't go into the basement when you're being chased. Like all the things that you're like, what are you doing?
I love there's this moment in, the new Candyman where the woman sort of hero at the center of things, she just like starts to walk into a basement. She just looks down there and she's like, nope, and turns around.
Yeah, I love that. So to think about, starting to wrap up, Susie, what's your next dream remake? Do you have another slasher film you'd like to take a spin at, or is there a project that you're really looking forward to that you'd want to share with us?
Oh goodness, I mean, there's so many, but I'm just so sort of fascinated with the 70s and 80s satanic panic. There is a movie that not many people saw with Peter Fonda called Race with the Devil. And I just remember loving really it when I was a kid. And I would love to do a modern version of that. Apparently it's hard. The rights are hard to get, so probably not. But yes, that would be, I'd love to do that. Yes. With all women.
Yeah. And Joe, do you have any that you'd love to see a fresh take on?
I would actually love to see Race with the Devil. It is a kind of obscure movie, but it's really, as I recall, really well done. I'm having trouble thinking of another one because I don't like it when people do the really obvious ones like Rosemary's Babies or Stepford Wives, where it's just like everybody has kind of thought about that a ton. So it's more fun to do something. I just saw Bloody Mama by another Roger Corman one last night, and it's very good. But I don't know if you could remake that now.
All right. Well, we all have lots of ideas now for our next movie night, and unfortunately, I hate to wrap up this conversation, but we're at the end of our talk on the Jefferson Exchange here. So, Susie and Joe, thank you so much for joining. That was a super fun to hear about the ins and outs of this genre and how all these movies are made. So I really appreciate it. Pick up a copy of Stepford Daughters at your favorite independent bookstore and check out the 2021 remake of Slumber Party Massacre to see girls kicking butt and saving the day. You can find Underground History online at jeffexchange.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you, Chelsea. And that's it for today's exchange. jeffexchange.org is our website. We upload all segments there and to podcasting sites like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Angela Decker of JPR News is our senior producer. Charlie Zimmerman, our assistant producer. Zach Beagle, our student assistant, is at the controls today. Maxwell and Terry Longshore composed our theme music. I'm Jeffrey Riley. Thanks for listening. Stay cool this week. Join us next time on the Jefferson Exchange and have a great day.